heart of the Wild West, emotions run deep and passion burns quietly. When she whispered, "It's too much." "I can't." The cowboy's gentle touch changed everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments below. Let's get started. The sun was sinking low over the Texas plains, casting long shadows across the open fields where the dry wind carried the scent of dust, hay, and faraway rain. The air shimmered with that golden warmth that only late summer could bring, soft yet filled with the promise of a storm. In that quiet hour between day and dusk, Clara Morgan stood at the edge of her inherited ranch, staring at a world that felt far too wild for her gentle hands. Everything seemed larger than life, the sky, the land, even the silence that hung heavy around her. It had been 3 weeks since she'd arrived from Dallas, leaving behind her apartment, her job at the marketing firm, and the familiar hum of city life. Now she found herself in boots that still felt too stiff, jeans that never fit right, and a heart full of uncertainty. The ranch had belonged to her late uncle, a man she barely remembered, yet his passing had changed everything. She had inherited not only the land but also its burdens, bills, broken fences, restless horses, and a legacy she didn't understand. The stallion in front of her neighed sharply, jerking against the reins in protest. Clara tried to steady her grip, but the animal's strength was overpowering. Her palms burned and her breath caught in frustration. "Easy, easy now," she whispered, but her voice trembled with fear more than authority. The horse reared slightly and her heart jumped to her throat. Then a deep voice came from behind, calm and steady, with that slow southern drawl that could settle even the wildest creature. "You can't fight him like that," said Jack Callahan, his broad frame stepping into view. The setting sun painted his rugged features in golden shadow, tanned skin, unshaven jaw, eyes the color of whiskey, and a Stetson that sat perfectly on his head. He looked like he belonged to the land itself, carved from its dust and storms. Clara turned to him, defensive but shaken. "I'm not fighting him," she said quickly. "I'm just trying to make him listen." Jack smirked slightly, crossing his arms. "Then you're doing both wrong," he replied. "Out here things don't listen just because you tell them to. They listen when you understand them." He walked closer, slow and deliberate, every movement confident. The horse settled almost instantly as he reached for the reins, his voice dropping low like a lullaby meant only for the animal. Clara watched in silent awe, noticing how the tension in the horse's body melted under his touch. "See that?" he said quietly. "Patience beats strength every time." Clara exhaled, lowering her gaze. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this," she admitted softly. "It's too much. I can't." Jack looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Not mocking, but understanding. "That's what they all say at first," he said. "But the land's got a way of changing people. It tests you, breaks you a little, then shows you what you're made of." His voice carried something deeper, not just advice, but experience, like a man who'd learned every lesson the hard way. The wind picked up suddenly, swirling around them as the sky began to darken. A storm was coming. Jack took the horse's reins and led it toward the barn, nodding for her to follow. Inside, the scent of hay and leather filled the air. He lit an old lantern, and the glow flickered against the wooden walls, casting a warm light between them. "You ain't got to do it all in one day," he said, hanging his hat on a hook. "No one ever did. But if you give up before you start, the land'll never forgive you." Clara brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, her fingers trembling slightly. "You talk like this place is alive," she said, trying to sound amused. Jack chuckled softly, leaning against a post. "That's because it is," he replied. "Every blade of grass, every breath of wind. You don't own it. You earn it." The thunder outside rumbled low and distant like a warning. The storm had arrived, rain beginning to patter against the tin roof, slow and steady. Inside the barn, time seemed to slow, the moments stretching quietly between them. She found herself watching him, the way his jaw tightened when he thought, the steadiness in his eyes. There was something grounding about him, something she hadn't felt in a long time. In the city, everything moved too fast. People talked but never listened, worked but never lived. Out here, even silence had meaning. Jack's presence filled the space like the scent of rain, gentle, strong, unavoidable. "You really believe I can do this?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible under the sound of the storm. He turned to her, his expression unreadable but kind. "I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't," he said simply. You just need to stop thinking so hard. The ranch don't care if you're scared, it only cares if you show up. She smiled faintly, almost in disbelief. You make it sound easy. Jack's grin widened, his dimples appearing briefly. It ain't, but neither's breathing. Doesn't mean you quit. The words lingered between them, soft but powerful, like the crack of lightning that briefly lit up the barn doors. The thunder grew louder, echoing across the plains. Jack stepped closer, checking the horse one last time before turning to face her. Storm's gonna get worse before it gets better, he said. You can stay here till it passes. She hesitated, looking at the rain now falling in sheets outside. You sure? He nodded. Ain't no sense drowning yourself just to prove you're tough. There was a teasing warmth in his tone, but behind it was genuine concern. She could feel it, and it unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Minutes stretched into hours as they waited out the storm. The steady rhythm of rain filled the silence between them, mingled with the occasional crack of thunder. Clara sat on a hay bale, her knees drawn close, while Jack tended to the lantern. You ever miss the city? He asked suddenly. She shook her head slowly. I thought I would, she said, but now I think I was just tired of pretending to belong somewhere I didn't. Jack studied her, his eyes softening. Then maybe you ended up right where you're meant to be. The storm roared one last time before beginning to fade, the rain easing into a whisper. Jack stood stretching slightly and glanced out through the barn door. The air outside shimmered with the scent of wet earth. Tomorrow's going to be clearer, he said. You'll see the land different when the sun hits it again. Clara looked up at him, her heart heavier than before, yet somehow lighter. For the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She was standing still. And maybe that was the beginning of everything. The morning broke wide and clear over the Texas horizon, washing the ranch in soft shades of gold and rose. The storm had passed, leaving the world reborn and glistening. The air smelled of wet soil and freedom. Clara stepped outside, her boots sinking slightly in the damp ground. The silence felt sacred, broken only by the distant whinny of horses and the creak of the barn door swinging gently in the wind. She had never seen anything so vast or alive. For the first time since arriving, she didn't feel like a stranger. She felt like part of the morning. Jack was already awake, of course. He stood near the corral, rolling up the sleeves of his worn denim shirt, the sunlight cutting across his shoulders like a painter's stroke. His movements were slow and purposeful, each one shaped by years of repetition. When he noticed her, he lifted his hat slightly in greeting, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. Morning, he said. His voice carried the warmth of the land itself, steady, low, comforting. Clara smiled back shyly. You work too early, she said, her voice softer than she intended. Jack chuckled, the sound deep and easy. The land don't wait for late risers, he replied. You'll learn that soon enough. She approached, watching him fix a section of fencing that the storm had torn apart. He worked with quiet confidence, every knot and twist of wire done with precision. She offered to help, and though he hesitated at first, he finally nodded, handing her a set of gloves. You sure you want to ruin those city hands? He teased. Clara grinned faintly. They could use a little ruin. His laughter echoed across the morning air. They worked side by side, sweat and sunlight blending into the rhythm of their labor. The horses grazed lazily nearby, tails swishing against flies. Jack occasionally glanced at her, half amused, half impressed at her determination. She stumbled once, pricking her finger on the wire, and hissed in pain. He reached out instinctively, taking her hand. Hold still, he said, his thumb brushing against her skin as he checked the tiny wound. His touch was careful, almost reverent, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to stop. Her breath caught, and neither spoke for a long second. You're tougher than you look, he said finally, releasing her hand with a smile that reached his eyes. Guess this place is already teaching you something. Clara looked away, hiding the warmth rising in her chest. Maybe it's the teacher, she said under her breath. Jack didn't reply, but the hint of a smirk curved his lips as he bent back to work. The sun climbed higher and the air grew heavy with heat. Dust clung to their boots, their arms, their hair, but somehow none of it mattered. For the first time she felt capable. When noon came, they rested beneath the shade of the big oak near the water trough. Jack handed her a tin cup of cool well water. She drank deeply, the taste pure and clean. You did good this morning, he said. Most folks quit by now. Clara laughed softly. I almost did. He tilted his head, studying her. But you didn't. That counts for something. She met his eyes, seeing not just approval but quiet respect. Maybe I just didn't want to disappoint you, she admitted. His brow lifted slightly, but he said nothing. The silence spoke louder than words. The afternoon drifted by in a haze of work and laughter. Jack showed her how to lead the horses to pasture, how to stack hay without splinters, how to listen to the rhythm of the wind to know when rain might return. Each lesson came with a story, some about the ranch, some about his younger days. My daddy used to say the land remembers every pair of boots that walks across it, he said once. So make sure yours leave the right kind of print. Clara smiled. Then I've got a lot of learning to do. As sunset approached, they stood together at the fence line, watching the sky burn in brilliant shades of orange and crimson. The world seemed endless from where they stood, and the silence between them was no longer awkward. It was comforting. Clara folded her arms against the cooling air. When I first came here, she said quietly, I thought this place would swallow me whole. Jack's eyes stayed on the horizon. And now, he asked. She glanced at him, her voice softer than the wind. Now I think maybe it's teaching me how to breathe. Jack turned to her then, something unreadable in his gaze. You ever think maybe you were meant for this life all along? He asked. She smiled a little sadly. I'm not sure what I'm meant for yet, but for the first time I'm not afraid to find out. He nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth curving. That's a start. The last light of day shimmered between them, and she realized that somewhere between the storms and the fences, something in her had shifted. She wasn't running anymore. She was staying, rooting herself in something real. When night fell, they walked back to the barn together. Crickets sang and the air smelled of cedar and smoke. Jack opened the door for her, his hand brushing against hers again. Light, accidental, yet full of meaning. You did fine today, Clara, he said quietly. You belong here more than you know. She looked up at him, her heart racing in a way she didn't fully understand. Thank you for not giving up on me. He smiled, tipping his hat. Wasn't ever thinking about it. And with that, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving her breathless beneath the stars. Inside the barn, Clara sat alone for a while, listening to the steady rhythm of the night. The horses shifted in their stalls, the lantern's flame flickered, and the echoes of Jack's words lingered in her mind. She realized that home wasn't always where you came from. It was sometimes where you found someone who saw you for who you could become. The ranch had tested her. The storm had shaken her, but his gentle touch had steadied her spirit. The land had changed her, but he had awakened something deeper. Outside, the moon rose high above the plain, silvering the fields and fences. Clara stepped to the doorway, the cool wind brushing her face. Somewhere out there, Jack was still awake, maybe looking up at the same sky. The thought made her heart ache in a way that felt both tender and alive. She whispered into the quiet, It's too much. I can't. But this time, the words no longer meant defeat. They were a memory, a beginning, because now she knew she could. And tomorrow she would prove it.